Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Raoul's breath clouded in front of him as he pushed open the door to his agent's office. The warmth inside was a welcome respite, but it did little to thaw the icy pit of desperation in his stomach.
Robert, please tell me you've got something for me,
Raoul said, his voice tinged with poorly concealed desperation. Robert, a portly man with thinning hair and thick-rimmed glasses, looked up from his cluttered desk.
Raoul, my boy, I was just about to call you. I've got a gig that might interest you. Raoul's heart leaped. A movie role? Robert's expression faltered. Well, not exactly. It's more of a seasonal position. Raoul's shoulders slumped. Seasonal? Robert, I need real work. I can't afford to— Now, hear me out. Robert interrupted, holding up a hand. It's at the mall's Santa Village. They're in a bit of a pickle and willing to pay handsomely for someone to step in last minute. Raoul's brow furrowed. Santa Village? What, you want me to play Santa? Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Not exactly. You see, their female elf broke her leg yesterday, and they need a replacement. Pronto. The words hung in the air for a moment before their full meaning sank in. Raoul's eyes widened. You want me to dress up as a female elf? Are you out of your mind? Listen, Raoul, Robert said, leaning forward. I know it's not ideal, but the pay is good. Really good. Enough to get your son that fancy gaming console he's been begging for. Raoul's resolve wavered at the mention of his son. He thought of Tommy's face lighting up on Christmas morning, of finally being able to give him something special after months of disappointment. How much? Raoul asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert scribbled a figure on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. Raoul's eyes bulged when he saw the number. That's more than I made on my last 3 gigs combined, Raoul said, his voice a mix of disbelief and temptation. Exactly, Robert said with a grin. So what do you say? Ready to embrace your inner elf? Raoul closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. I'll do it. For Tommy. The next morning, Raoul found himself in the back room of the mall's Santa Village, staring at his reflection in a full-length mirror. The transformation was unsettling, to say the least. Gone was his scruffy stubble and unkempt hair. In their place was a smooth, powdered face framed by long, curled auburn locks. The costume department had worked wonders with padding and contouring, giving him the illusion of a feminine figure. The green and red elf costume, complete with jingling bells and pointy shoes, completed the look. I can't believe I'm doing this, Raoul muttered, adjusting the long, pointed ears that had been glued to the sides of his head. Believe it, sugar, said Marge, the costume designer. She was a stout woman with a no-nonsense attitude and hands that moved with surprising dexterity for their size. Now remember what I told you. Small steps, high voice, and for heaven's sake, don't scratch yourself in public. Raoul nodded, still unable to tear his eyes away from his reflection. What if someone recognizes me? Marge snorted. Honey, your own mother wouldn't recognize you right now. Now let's work on that voice of yours. From now on, your name is Zoya, got it? Zoya, Raoul repeated, his voice cracking as he tried to pitch it higher. I'm Zoya the elf. Again, Marge commanded. And this time, put some jingle in it. For the next hour, Raoul practiced his new persona, walking in the uncomfortably tight shoes, speaking in a higher register, and even perfecting a girlish giggle that made him cringe inwardly every time he did it. Finally, it was time. Marge gave him one last once-over, adjusted his hat, and shooed him out into the mall. The Santa Village was a riot of color and sound. Tinsel glittered from every surface, cheerful holiday music blared from hidden speakers, and the air was thick with the scent of peppermint and gingerbread. Children lined up eagerly to sit on Santa's lap, their parents snapping photos and trying to maintain order. Raoul, or rather Zoya, took a deep breath and stepped into the fray. Ho, ho, ho! Who wants to visit Santa? he called out, his voice high and cheerful. A little girl with pigtails tugged on his skirt. Me! I want to see Santa! Raoul looked down, momentarily panicked before remembering his role.
Well, aren't you just the cutest little gumdrop?
He cooed, bending down to the girl's level.
Let's get you in line to see the big man himself.
As the day wore on, Raoul found himself slowly settling into his new role. The constant movement and interaction left little time for self-consciousness. He guided children to Santa, posed for photos, and even helped manage the occasional tantrum with a mix of cheerful distraction and promises of candy canes. It wasn't until late afternoon that he encountered his first real challenge. A group of guys swaggered into the village, clearly more interested in causing trouble than spreading holiday cheer.
Hey, elf girl,
one of them called out.
How about a kiss under the mistletoe?
Raoul felt a flare of masculine indignation, but Zoya's cheerful smile never faltered.
Now, boys,
he chirped, wagging a finger playfully. Santa's watching, you know. You don't want to end up on the naughty list. As they left, Raoul caught the eye of Santa, who gave him an approving wink. Raoul felt a strange surge of pride. He'd handled that like a pro, like a woman. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tinsel and candy canes. By the time the last child had been ushered out and the village closed for the night, Raoul was exhausted but oddly exhilarated. Back in the dressing room, he slumped into a chair, kicking off the uncomfortable shoes with a groan of relief. Well, Marge said, appearing with a steaming cup of hot chocolate. Looks like our little Zoya survived her first day. Raoul accepted the cup gratefully.
It was different,
he admitted.
But not as bad as I thought it would be.
Marge chuckled.
Honey, you were a natural out there. The kids loved you, and I saw how you handled those troublemakers. Impressive.
Raoul felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate.
Thanks, Marge. I guess all those years of acting finally paid off.
As he began to remove his makeup, Raoul caught sight of himself in the mirror. For a moment, he barely recognized the person staring back at him. It wasn't just the physical transformation. There was something different in his eyes. A spark of confidence he hadn't seen in a long time. You know, he said slowly, I think I might be starting to enjoy this. Marge patted his shoulder.
That's the spirit, sugar. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's another day in elf paradise.
As Raoul made his way home that night, his feet aching and the scent of peppermint still clinging to his clothes, he found himself looking forward to the next day with an excitement he hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, this crazy job was exactly what he needed. The next morning, Raoul arrived at the mall early, a spring in his step that belied the soreness in his feet. He'd spent half the night practicing his Zoya voice in the mirror, much to the annoyance of his neighbors. But as he stepped into the dressing room, he felt ready to take on whatever the day might bring.
Well, look who's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning, Marge greeted him,
already bustling about with various makeup brushes and hair accessories.
Ready to become Zoya again?
Raoul nodded, settling into the makeup chair.
You know, I had the strangest dream last night,
he confessed as Marge began applying foundation to his face.
I was Zoya, but I wasn't just pretending. It felt real.
Marge's hands paused for a moment, and she met his eyes in the mirror. Dreams have a funny way of showing us parts of ourselves we didn't know existed, she said cryptically. Now, close your eyes. Time to work some magic. As Marge worked her transformation, Raoul found his mind wandering. He thought about the way he'd felt yesterday, the rush of successfully navigating difficult situations, the joy of making children smile. It was so different from the grind of auditions and rejections he'd been facing for months. There, Marge said finally, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Zoya's ready to spread some Christmas cheer. Raoul opened his eyes and gasped softly. The face looking back at him was even more convincingly feminine than yesterday. Marge had added some subtle contouring that softened his jawline and accentuated his cheekbones.
The wig was styled in loose, flowing curls that framed his face beautifully. "Marge, this is incredible," he breathed, turning his head to examine the transformation from different angles. "Honey, in this business, we don't just dress people up. We create characters," Marge said with a wink. "Now, let's get you into your costume. We've made a few adjustments." The adjustments turned out to be a slightly more fitted version of yesterday's outfit, with subtle padding in strategic areas to create a more convincing feminine silhouette. As Raoul slipped into the costume, he was surprised at how natural it felt. "Now, remember," Marge said as she made final adjustments, "Zoya isn't just a character you're playing. For the next few hours, she's who you are. Embrace it." Raoul nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the Santa village. The moment he entered, it was as if a switch had been flipped. His posture changed, becoming more graceful and feminine. His steps became smaller, more delicate. And when he spoke, Zoya's voice came out as naturally as breathing. "Good morning, everyone," he trilled, clapping his hands together. "Who's ready to see Santa?" The day flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Raoul found himself fully immersed in Zoya's persona, effortlessly chatting with parents, soothing fussy toddlers, and even joining in with the other elves for an impromptu dance number when the line got too long. During a brief lull, Santa, a jovial man named Frank beneath the beard, leaned over to him. "You're doing great, kid," he whispered. "The parents are loving you. Keep it up." Raoul beamed at the praise, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. It had been so long since anyone had appreciated his performance skills. As the afternoon wore on, Raoul encountered a new challenge. A harried-looking woman approached him, dragging a reluctant little boy by the hand. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice strained. "My son is afraid of Santa. Is there any way you could, I don't know, talk to him or something?" Raoul looked down at the boy, who was on the verge of tears. Without thinking, he knelt down, his skirt pooling around him. "Hi there, sweetheart," he said softly. "What's your name?" Michael," the boy sniffled. "Well, Michael, did you know that I used to be scared of Santa too?" Raoul said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" Raoul nodded solemnly. "Oh yes, but then I found out something amazing. Want to know what it is?" Michael nodded eagerly. "I discovered that Santa is actually the nicest, funniest person in the whole world," Raoul whispered. "And you know what else? He gives the best high fives ever. Want to see?" Michael hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Raoul stood up, took the boy's hand, and led him over to where Frank was sitting. "Hey, Santa," he called out. "I've got a brave boy here who wants to see your famous high five." Frank, catching on immediately, held out his hand. "Ho, ho, ho, come on over, young man." To everyone's surprise, Michael ran forward and slapped Santa's hand with gusto. The tension broken, he climbed onto Frank's lap and began chattering away about his Christmas wishes. The boy's mother mouthed a silent thank you to Raoul, who felt a lump form in his throat. He'd made a real difference, however small, in someone's day. As closing time approached, Raoul found himself feeling a strange reluctance to leave. He'd grown comfortable in Zoya's skin, enjoying the way people smiled at him, the easy camaraderie with the other mall employees. Back in the dressing room, he stared at his reflection, marveling at how natural the feminine visage looked now. "Marge," he said slowly, "is it weird that I don't want to take this off?" Marge looked at him thoughtfully. "Honey, in my years doing this job, I've learned that sometimes a costume can reveal more about a person than their everyday clothes. Maybe Zoya's showing you a side of yourself you never knew existed." Raoul pondered her words as he carefully removed the costume and makeup. Even as his masculine features reemerged, he felt as though something fundamental had shifted within him. That night, as he lay in bed, Raoul found himself thinking not about his stalled acting career or his financial troubles, but about the joy he'd felt as Zoya. For the first time in months, he fell asleep with a smile on his face. The next few days passed in a blur of tinsel, candy canes, and holiday cheer. Raoul threw himself into his role as Zoya with increasing enthusiasm, each day bringing new challenges and rewards. He perfected the art of calming tantrum-throwing toddlers, mastered the technique of subtly encouraging shy children to approach Santa, and even learned to execute a perfect curtsy in his elf shoes. One particularly memorable afternoon, a little girl approached him with wide, curious eyes. "Are you a real elf?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Raoul knelt down, his skirt fanning out around him.
"Well, what do you think?"
he asked, tapping the pointed ears glued to the sides of his head. The girl reached out hesitantly, then giggled as she touched one of the prosthetic ears. "They feel real!" she exclaimed. "Of course they're real, silly," Raoul said with a wink. "How else would I hear when children are being naughty or nice?" The girl's eyes widened even further. "Can you really hear that?" Raoul nodded solemnly. "Oh, yes, and you know what I hear about you." He leaned in close, as if sharing a great secret. "I hear that you've been very, very good this year." The girl's face lit up with joy, and she threw her arms around Raoul in a spontaneous hug. For a moment, Raoul was startled by the sudden display of affection. Then, slowly, he returned the hug, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. As the girl skipped away to join her parents in line, Raoul caught sight of himself in a nearby mirror. The person looking back at him was Zoya, confident, joyful, and radiant. For a moment, he couldn't remember why he'd ever been reluctant to take on this role. Later that evening, as he was helping to clean up the Santa village, Frank approached him.
"You know, Raoul,"
he said, his voice low to avoid being overheard. "I've been doing this gig for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone take to it quite like you have." Raoul felt a blush creep up his cheeks, visible even under the layers of makeup. "Thanks, Frank. I have to admit I'm enjoying it more than I ever thought I would." Frank nodded knowingly. "It's not just about wearing a costume, is it? It's about bringing joy to others. And let me tell you, you've got a real talent for it." As Raoul made his way to the dressing room, Frank's words echoed in his mind. He'd spent so long chasing roles, trying to be what casting directors wanted, that he'd almost forgotten the pure joy of performance, of touching people's lives, even in small ways. Marge was waiting for him, a knowing smile on her face. "Well, sugar, ready to become Raoul again?" Raoul hesitated, his hand hovering over the makeup removal wipes. "Marge," he said slowly, "can I ask you something?" "Shoot," she replied, settling into a chair.
"Is it normal to feel more comfortable as Zoya than as myself?"
The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Marge's expression softened. "Oh, honey, there's no such thing as normal in this business. What matters is how you feel." Raoul nodded, mulling over her words as he began to remove his makeup. As his masculine features slowly reemerged, he felt a strange sense of loss. "You know," Marge said, watching him closely, "some people find that playing a role helps them discover parts of themselves they never knew existed."
"Maybe Zoya isn't just a character for you.
Maybe she's a part of who you are." Raoul met her eyes in the mirror, a mix of confusion and realization dawning on his face. "But what does that mean?" Marge shrugged. "That's for you to figure out, sugar. All I know is I've never seen you look happier than when you're Zoya." That night, as Raoul lay in bed, his mind whirled with thoughts and questions. He thought about the joy he'd felt as Zoya, the confidence that had come so naturally in that role. He thought about the way people had responded to him, the smiles and laughter he'd elicited. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider a possibility that both thrilled and terrified him. What if Zoya wasn't just a character? What if she was a part of him that had been waiting to emerge? As he drifted off to sleep, Raoul made a decision. He would use the remaining days of his contract at the Santa Village to explore this new side of himself, to understand what Zoya meant to him and what she could teach him about who he truly was. The next morning, Raoul arrived at the mall with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As Marge worked her magic, transforming him into Zoya, he paid close attention to every detail, the way the makeup softened his features, how the wig framed his face, the subtle changes in his posture as he donned the elf costume. "You seem different today," Marge observed as she put the finishing touches on his makeup. "More present?" Raoul nodded, meeting her eyes in the mirror. I think I'm ready to really embrace this, Marge, to see where it leads me." Marge's face broke into a wide smile. "That's my girl," she said, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "Now go out there and spread some Christmas magic." As Raoul stepped into the Santa village, he felt a shift within himself. He wasn't just playing Zoya anymore. He was allowing her to be a part of him, to guide his actions and words. The change was subtle but noticeable. His movements became more fluid, his voice more naturally pitched. He found himself responding to situations with an intuition that felt distinctly feminine, yet also deeply authentic. A young boy approached, clutching a crumpled letter in his hand. "Excuse me, Miss Elf," he said shyly. "Can you help me? I want to give this to Santa, but I'm scared." Raoul knelt down, his skirt pooling around him. "Of course, sweetie," he said, his voice soft and encouraging. "What's in the letter?" The boy's lower lip trembled. It's about my dad. He's in the hospital, and I want Santa to make him better for Christmas." Raoul felt a lump form in his throat. Without thinking, he pulled the boy into a gentle hug. "Oh, honey," he murmured. "That's such a brave and kind thing to ask for. I'll tell you what. Why don't we go give that letter to Santa together? I'll be right there with you the whole time." The boy nodded, slipping his small hand into Raoul's. As they approached Santa's chair, Raoul felt a surge of protectiveness, a maternal instinct he'd never experienced before. Frank, seeing the serious expressions on their faces, leaned down with a gentle smile. "What's this?" he asked kindly. The boy, with Raoul's encouragement, handed over the letter and whispered his Christmas wish. Frank's eyes softened with understanding, and he pulled the child into a warm embrace. "I promise you," Frank said, his voice thick with emotion, "Santa will do everything in his power to help your dad. And you know what? I think you being such a brave, caring son is already the best medicine he could ask for." As the boy walked away, wiping his eyes but smiling, Raoul felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He'd connected with that child in a way he never could have as Raoul. Zoya had allowed him to access a well of empathy and nurturing he hadn't known he possessed. The rest of the day passed in a similar fashion, with Raoul fully inhabiting Zoya's persona. He found himself picking up on subtle cues from children and parents alike, adapting his approach to each unique situation with an ease that surprised him. By the time the mall closed, Raoul was exhausted but exhilarated. As he sat in the dressing room, slowly removing his makeup, he caught Marge's eye in the mirror. "Well?" she asked, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Raoul took a deep breath. I think I understand now," he said slowly. "Zoya isn't just a character. She's a part of me, a part I want to explore more." Marge nodded, her expression warm and understanding. "I had a feeling you'd get there eventually, sugar. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Raoul looked at his reflection, half Zoya, half himself, and felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "But I know I can't just go back to being the person I was before. Zoya has shown me something about myself, something I can't ignore." As he left the mall that night, Raoul felt as though he was standing on the threshold of a new chapter in his life. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was also full of possibility. The final week of Raoul's contract at the Santa Village flew by in a blur of tinsel, laughter, and self-discovery. Each day he found himself slipping more easily into Zoya's persona,
the boundary between character and self becoming increasingly blurred. On his last day, as he prepared to don the elf costume one final time, Raoul felt a mix of emotions swirling within him. Excitement, nervousness, and a touch of sadness at the thought of saying goodbye to this experience. Marge, sensing his mood, approached him with a gentle smile.
"Big day, sugar. How are you feeling?"
Raoul met her eyes in the mirror.
"Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me doesn't want this to end."
Marge nodded understandingly.
"Well, who says it has to?
The holidays might be over soon, but that doesn't mean Zoya has to disappear." Her words struck a chord in Raoul. He'd been so focused on the job ending that he hadn't considered the possibility of continuing this journey of self-discovery beyond the Santa village. As he stepped out into the mall for the last time as Zoya, Raoul felt a newfound determination. He would make this day count, not just for the children he'd entertain, but for himself. The hours flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Raoul threw himself into his role with more enthusiasm than ever, determined to create lasting memories for every child he encountered. Towards the end of the day, a familiar face appeared in the crowd, his son, Tommy, accompanied by Raoul's ex-wife. For a moment, panic flared in Raoul's chest. Would Tommy recognize him? What would his ex-wife think? But as they approached, Raoul took a deep breath and channeled Zoya's confidence. "Well, hello there," he chirped, kneeling down to Tommy's level.
"Are you here to see Santa?"
Tommy nodded shyly, his eyes wide as he took in Zoya's colorful costume.
"What's your name, sweetie?"
Raoul asked, even though he knew the answer.
"Tommy,"
his son replied softly.
"Well, Tommy, I bet Santa is going to be so excited to see you. Do you know what you're going to ask for?"
Tommy's face lit up.
"A new gaming console!" he exclaimed. "My dad promised he'd get it for me."
Raoul felt a lump form in his throat.
"Your dad sounds like a pretty great guy,"
he managed to say.
"He is,"
Tommy said earnestly.
"He's an actor, you know. The best one ever."
Raoul blinked back tears, overwhelmed by his son's unconditional love and admiration. In that moment, he realized that whether he was Raoul or Zoya, the most important role he'd ever play was that of a parent. As he guided Tommy and his ex-wife to Santa's chair, Raoul caught his ex's eye. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of recognition, but it passed quickly, replaced by a warm smile. "Thank you," she said softly.
"You're wonderful with children."
Raoul felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Thank you," he replied, Zoya's voice tinged with genuine emotion.
"It's been a joy."
As the day drew to a close, Raoul found himself lingering in the Santa village, reluctant to leave. Frank approached him, still in his Santa costume, but with the beard pulled down.
"Hell of a run, kid,"
he said, clapping Raoul on the shoulder.
"You've got a real gift, you know that?"
Raoul smiled, feeling a mix of pride and bittersweetness.
"Thanks, Frank. I'm going to miss this."
Frank's eyes twinkled.
"Who says it has to end here? The world could use more people spreading joy year-round, if you ask me."
As Raoul made his way back to the dressing room for the final time, Frank's words echoed in his mind. The idea of continuing this journey, of finding ways to incorporate Zoya into his life beyond the holiday season, began to take root. Marge was waiting for him, a knowing look on her face.
"Well, sugar, what's next for you?"
Raoul took a deep breath, looking at his reflection. Zoya's face, but with his own eyes shining through.
"I'm not sure exactly," he said slowly. "But I know I can't just go back to who I was before. Zoya, she's shown me a part of myself I never knew existed, a part I want to explore more."
Marge nodded approvingly.
"That's the spirit. You know, there's a whole world out there for people who've had experiences like yours. Support groups, performance troupes, charity organizations. Maybe it's time to see where this journey can take you." As Raoul carefully removed his costume and makeup for the last time, he felt a sense of transformation that went far beyond the physical. He was no longer just Raoul, the struggling actor desperate for a break. He was someone new,
someone who had discovered a wellspring of empathy, joy, and self-expression he never knew he possessed. Leaving the mall that night, Raoul felt as though he was stepping into a new chapter of his life. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was also filled with possibility and hope. He thought about Tommy, about the joy he'd brought to so many children over the past weeks. He thought about the confidence and self-assurance he'd felt as Zoya, and the way it had begun to seep into his everyday life. As he walked home through the chilly evening, Raoul made a decision. He would use the money he'd earned to buy Tommy's Christmas gift, yes, but he would also invest in himself. In exploring this new facet of his identity, in finding ways to bring Zoya's spirit of joy and compassion into the world year-round. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.